Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the February 2024 MSMF Client Podcast. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Cody Redding and Jay Peters. Gentlemen, happy February.
Hey.
Thank you.
Happy Chiefs Super Bowl victory.
That's right.
It's a big one there.
That was a big one.
They're now considered a dynasty, I believe.
Self-anointed.
Self-anointed.
I'd like to see one more before I put the D word in front of them, but was happy they won, okay? Today, guys, we're going to talk about something that we get calls on all the time. And I think when we lay out the context of it, we'll understand why we get very frequent calls on what we would call a financial windfall, okay? And as you know, and we're going to talk about today, financial windfalls have some serious pitfalls that we have to be aware of, okay? And when I say financial windfall, people normally think of
Lottery.
the lottery,
Got
correct.
lucky.
But guess what? There's a lot of other financial windfalls, from the various forms of an inheritance, from a gift, insurance proceeds, from a life insurance contract where someone's a beneficiary, someone sells their business, someone is asked to leave their business and gets a buyout. So there's a lot of different forms of financial windfalls, and it can create a lot of different emotions that we're going to talk about in a minute. But what we always urge our clients to do is let's just put the stop sign on right there, flash it up there, and let's take our time and develop a plan, right? That's key number one in terms of these keys we're going to walk through today, is just take a deep breath, and we can help you figure it out. There's folks out there to help you figure it out, but take your time because as you see, these pitfalls can end up being expensive, right? First, what I want to start with is really financial windfalls can bring some serious emotional, psychological, even family dynamics into play. And what's very interesting, particularly when someone might get an inheritance, it can create some guilt associated with it. Significant windfalls can create anxiety. So there's a lot of emotions that come into play. And it can also at times create some pressure from other friends and family members who might think that they're either entitled or they need help. They want you to help them. So a lot of those things come into play. And I will share one statistic with you focused exclusively on lottery winners, but it really applies if you dig into the data to all recipients of a financial windfall, is that there's been a statistic running around for quite a few years that 70% of lottery winners end up within 5 years either losing it all or bankrupt. And as a matter of fact, that's categorically false, okay? What happened about 20 years ago, there was a financial planning conference with an industry group, many of which we belong to. And there was a panel, and a professor on that panel made this claim, or his assumption, that 70% of lottery winners lose the money and are bankrupt in 5 years. And that was not backed up by any research, but it was so widely reported, it became what we would call viral, that it was assumed to be fact. In fact, that's not the case at all. And those numbers are dramatically lower. But I think the most important thing is what current research, some research from 2018 and 2023 found, is that, we always talk, you hear this comment that money can't buy happiness. That's actually true. When they did a variety of these studies, they found that the general happiness of people who received a financial windfall wasn't necessarily greater than what it was before they received the windfall. However, their life satisfaction had improved, as we would probably anticipate. They reduced or eliminated debt on their balance sheet, provided some help with their monthly expenses. So the short of it is, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there in terms of what happens if you were to receive a financial windfall. More importantly, there's a ton of financial or pitfalls that we got to avoid with these things. And so, beyond the emotional, the psychological, the pressure from families, let's get into kind of the serious money issues associated with this. Jay, why don't you talk first, because I mentioned all the various forms of a windfall. There's a lot of tax issues.
Yeah, and we do get asked this often, and I'm curious, how many times have you guys played the what if? What if we won the lottery? What would you do, right? You've ever been asked
Absolutely.
that?
Oh, yeah.
And usually my answer starts off with, Well, I don't know because there's certain different things that we have to talk through. And that's what we're talking through today, right? And so lottery is a big one. It has its own tax implications. You know, whatever number you see on the billboards, first of all, it's not the number you're going to get.
That's correct.
And then you go ahead and have that again for taxes.
Right.
And you're going to end up probably with a different number than what you started with, right? So tax really can affect your windfall. Lottery is a big one. Inheritance, there's different ways that you could inherit something, whether it's property, cash, insurance, a retirement account. Each one of those things I just named has a different way that it's taxed and the way that it's handled. So kind of having an idea and a handle around what's this going to be ahead of time, that's why we should stop and make a plan, right? Because it could be very different. Another thing could be if it's a gift. Maybe you are giving the gift or someone is giving you the gift. Each one of those has a different circumstance you need to be aware of, how it's taxed. Insurance proceeds, generally non-taxable, but I have to put the asterisk on generally
Always.
because there's always exceptions. Business buyout, like you had mentioned before, or any type of business thing, there's always going to be some sort of taxes that you have to anticipate with that. So that's really the biggest thing to be thinking about, and why we want to stop at the very beginning is, okay, you know a number that you're expecting, but is it how much you're going to walk away with, right?
Absolutely. And there's a reason why once we get past the emotional and psychological, we go right to tax because that is a huge one and can shrink these windfalls dramatically, right? Next one, Cody, let's talk about, when we get to that point, debt issues that should be important to someone that receives a windfall.
Yeah, so debt, right off the bat, it depends on the type of debt. Some people are of the opinion that, especially if they come with a great windfall, that having no debt is a good thing, and I'm not going to argue that at all. But there's also the financial calculation you can do and see if it, if you could be rewarded by holding debt. But I think the big thing is taking a look at what type of personal debts or credit cards that I generally have a very high interest rate that I can automatically just get rid of. Do I have student loans out there that I've had out there for 20 years and they don't ever seem to go down that I want to finally be able to tackle? And probably the big thing is we have a lot of conversations about mortgages. Well, it depends what kind of rate you got, right? So if you got a 3% rate out there and you can get 5% on a money market, well, might behoove you to maybe keep some debt. But it's just important to think about what debts you have and which ones you want to take care of first, I think is the big thing. Loans to family members as well. So, if you have current outstanding loans and let's say you come into a big windfall of money or inheritance or whatever it might be, you can't just forgive the debt without any sort of tax implications. So there are ways that you can maybe gift some of the money and avoid some tax situation, but you need to have that correct order in place. Yeah, so that could always be a big one. Or versus taking, maybe you do have some friends or family that you want to be able to loan them money. What does that look like, and how to appropriately set that up and make sure you're tracking that correctly. And then the big one, you got a big windfall of money, and what about some estate debts that occur or make a pitfall for the future, right? So, I think as far as getting rid of debt's always a good thing, but let's make sure it makes financial sense first.
So you mean to tell me that the IRS is always watching?
Big Brother's always watching.
Wait a minute, I thought that was the government. Well, I guess the IRS is the government.
I guess
Quasi.
Quasi.
Yeah.
Okay, Jay. So the first three things are kind of most immediate, right? We're looking right out our window. Now we can look a little bit farther towards the horizon on our next kind of major issue, which would be what are really long-term objectives we might have.
And I kind of like to look at anytime you have a little bit of extra money, of kind of looking at 4 different ways. Cody talked about a big one, and with the debt, so I consider it like past you, right? And then also future you when you're talking about long-term objectives. So what do you want this money to do for you, for your family, for your community, that sort of a thing. So maybe that means investing some of it or saving some of it somewhere. That would be really good for future you. Or, I think it's also good to give yourself permission to maybe spend a little bit of it today, right? So there's past, present, and future you. And then also the fourth one would be doing good. So whether that's for your community or for your church or for your if you love animals, or there's all kinds of family members. It's just trying to do something good with it that I think really makes a difference emotionally about it. And it helps with some of the emotional things you talked about earlier, the guilt, the anxiety. If you can do a little bit of each of those, I kind of feel like it's good. So long terms, whether you're saving it or you're investing it, or you put it into a retirement account or something else, that's super important.
Yeah, I like that. Present you, future you, and do good. That's a great way to put it. Okay, Cody. So let's say we've gone through. We're working through the emotional aspects. We feel like we get a pretty good handle of what our favorite uncle, Uncle Sam, is going to take away from us, right? We've managed maybe debt to some extent. To Jay's point, we've looked at present you, future you, and do good. And now it's come time we're going to invest some of this money. What are we dealing with here?
Yeah, I think a whole bunch of things come to mind, but your current before you became with the Windfall and afterwards, it might totally change your way about investing. The risk that you take, are there opportunity risk out there that you can now afford to take? And some people are the exact opposite, like, hey, I got this amount of money and I'm not going to risk any of it. So it certainly comes to reevaluating and readjusting that. Probably the most important thing is do you have some sort of investment strategy in place? Do you know that investment strategy is going to be set around your risk that you're willing to take? That way you can weather any type of market storm that might arise out there. And I'm sure if you come across some money that you weren't expecting, probably your long-term outlook is maybe a little bit different. And, how do we go about adjusting that and making that a good spot for you? And then your, cash that you're currently holding or assets, is that going to change? I think Jay's probably going to hit on some lifestyle inflation or lifestyle creep up here, but how much you hold in cash is going to probably have a little different impact as well. So, all that kind of feeds right into each other there.
Yeah, and I would say, I think you bring up a good point. This can create a situation where people can maybe hold more cash than they ever have, but they have additional resources now to invest long term. So maybe taking a little bit more risk or getting this risk speed limit, their comfort zone, a little bit higher on longer term money because they built up their cash reserve.
Yeah, because they have the ability to pull off that cash for a longer period of time and let the riskier stuff do what they do.
Right. Excellent. So, Jay, what we see a lot of, and I know you deal with this with your clients, or at least sometimes prospects that come in who haven't been your client and you haven't been able to walk them through this process. But even though the 70% statistic is wrong, where people run into problem is what Cody alluded to, is this lifestyle creep. So why don't you walk us through that pitfall and really what it means? Yeah,
and so, lifestyle creep, first of all, it sounds like something a celebrity would be afraid of, right? The lifestyle creep. Sorry, I had to make that joke. But if you think about it, and one of the first things we do when we're talking about your lifestyle is taking a look at, well, how much are you spending? What is your current lifestyle? And matching up with your income level. Well, if you just had some sort of windfall, do you want that to change? Or do you want your base lifestyle to increase for some reason? Does that mean you're going to travel more, or you're going to be more generous, or get some new threads all the time? I don't know. But having that conversation first around what are you doing now, and do I want to change something? And then the last thing is that going to change your overall plan, your future, your long-term goals, your risk that you could take if you do want to increase your lifestyle? I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just making sure that the decision that you make, you've already thought about it and had a conversation around how is this going to affect everything else that I'm doing, right?
Right. Super. Yeah. And I again, I can't reiterate enough, if you walk through this discipline process and you start with the emotions and everything else, the risk of lifestyle creep is not that great. It's when you jump right to, hey, I've been waiting for a new car. I want to really bring my wardrobe up to speed. Man, let's go look at a new house. And before you know it, you've spent a bunch on stuff, and you really don't have a game plan, and you really haven't been a good steward of this money.
Right, and it's going back to the other thing I was saying earlier. I think it's okay to spend a little bit.
Sure.
But having a governor on that,
right,
especially long term, and making sure you're a good steward of it, like you said, right? So.
Yeah, and we can see a lot of that, particularly with inheritance. We hear a lot of times that people feel guilty spending the money because it came from their parents or their grandparents, and that's not healthy either. So there a lot of the emotional dynamics can play in either way by spending too much or not spending at all, which isn't necessarily good. Cody, the last pitfall, this one's one that we would recognize, but not one typically that our clients recognize. You mentioned it before. There can be some potential kind of estate issues that we have to manage to when someone gets a windfall via the lottery, via inheritance, insurance proceeds, whatever the source. It can create some other issues on the back end that we got to protect against.
Yeah, I think, the insurance, your current insurance situation, things that come to my mind are, do you have the need for the insurance anymore? Because a lot of time you're probably holding the insurance to pay off current debts that you may have, maybe some income replacement or funding future kids' education. Well, now if you have a pot of money over here, what's the need for it?
Right.
Or the exact opposite case, you come into a lot of money, now you have maybe an estate issue to where your estate has become taxable. Especially here in the next couple of years, if nothing happens with current tax code, we know it's going to be cut a little bit more in half, right? So are there types of, first of all, do you have estate planning documents in place? That's probably very important that you at least want to revisit your trust maybe that you had made 10, 15 years ago. But secondly, if you are going to be maybe in a taxable estate situation, there are different types of insurance, survivorship, and things like that can help offset some of that taxable event that may happen.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of things that need to happen with the insurance part, especially depending on the amount of money that you have coming in.
Right. Even you mentioned trust documents, which are a little bit more of an advanced estate planning tool, but even the fundamentals like a will, healthcare power of attorney,
all that stuff.
durable power of attorneys for if something happens to you, but you're still alive to make financial decisions. When you end up ramping up your balance sheet because you got a financial windfall, those all come into play. And it can literally take you very quickly out of this mode where you don't think you need a will or these documents, and you immediately need them to protect what you have.
Yep.
Okay, so clearly financial windfall, there are a bunch of pitfalls. There is a defined process that we normally recommend that folks kind of walk through with that. Final thoughts on that, Jay?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on the last thing you said there. So when we're talking about all these different things, these are all questions that we would sit down with someone and go through, and not to be scary, but instead, so then that way when you decide what you're going to do, you can know that this is the best thing for you.
Right.
And so, I really like this because it's almost a decision tree, so you can move forward with confidence.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Cody?
Yeah, kind of going off what Jay was saying, making sure that you go and meet with somebody first, instead of pulling the triggers here or there and thinking you're doing the right thing. Like everyone, talk about just paying off debts, right? Well, not necessarily is the best maybe action for you, given your current circumstances. So little things like that add up. And I think the big one people make too is, well, I got all this money out here, I don't have a need for insurance. Well, it might be the exact opposite case.
Yeah.
Everyone's opinion on that estate tax is different. Some people say I don't care, I'm not going to be here, and others say, well, I have the set mind that I want to leave my kids some sort of legacy, and that's insurance can make that happen for you.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I would add is kind of a bonus pitfall to be aware of. A lot of these, when there's financial windfall, a lot of this stuff ends up being public record.
Yeah.
Okay? Mm-hmm. And, the nefarious actors out there scan and scour these public records, and you'll get these random crazy phone calls acting like your niece or nephew, brother, sister, parent, that you need money. Or they need money, you need to wire it to us. So be careful of the scams, because a lot of this stuff ends up in the newspaper, online, and is accessible, and people will do their best to illegally separate you from your money. That's just the way it is. And I think in our world, to close this out, this is very much of financial windfalls. It is the right time for some professional advice. I know you guys are the same as me. It's our job. It's very easy to act unemotional about this and very difficult for our clients to act unemotional in terms of their decisions, particularly if it's an inheritance and there's some of these emotions involved. Seek out professional advice. We're willing and would love the opportunity to help you or help any of your friends or colleagues. But even if it's not us, talk to your tax professional, your CPA, your financial advisor. These can be pretty heady decisions, but when you walk through the process and create a strategy and overall game plan, it will serve you long term. And even though the 70% statistic isn't really accurate, as we found, it will keep you from being a statistic.
Yeah.
So look forward to talking to you guys next month. Again, call, email, use the text line if you have any questions, you want to talk through this, you have any friends or family that have had a financial windfall and are kind of scratching the back of their head. If not, let's go Blues. They're in a playoff position right now. Keep your fingers crossed. Let's keep winning. And we'll see you guys next month.